I had tremendous hope in me, which was slashed by day two. Day two. Of the honeymoon. Of the fairy tale. Of the marriage that 750 million people had watched begin 4 days earlier in the grandest cathedral in England, with the grandest dress anyone had ever seen and a crowd noise so large it filtered through stone walls like weather. Day two. She said it herself, on tape, into a recorder in her apartment at Kensington Palace, alone, years after it happened, with the particular flatness in her voice of someone who has had long enough to stop being surprised by the thing they're describing. Not anger, not self-pity, just a woman stating a fact that had been true for so long it had stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like the shape of things. The hope slashed by day two. The public side very different, obviously, from the private side. The individual crucifying herself inside, because she didn't think she was good enough. Those are Diana's words.
All of them. Not a biographer's interpretation. Not a courtier's briefing or a palace press release or a tabloid reconstruction. Her voice. Her words. Into a recorder that she trusted to outlast the managed version of her life that the institution was running simultaneously, in the same city, in the same years, behind the same walls. The managed version said, a fairy tale. A radiant young woman, slightly overwhelmed, growing into one of the most beloved public figures in the world. The occasional difficulty, the occasional strain, the kind of thing any young couple might navigate. The marriage managed. The institution continued. Diana's version said something else, and the distance between those two versions, the gap between what the world saw and what was actually happening, is the story this channel exists to tell. This is that story. Not one incident. Not one confrontation. The full marriage, the full span of 15 years, from the engagement through the divorce, told in the detail that the institution worked very hard to keep buried. Everything in this script comes from Diana's own voice. From the Morton tapes, recorded in secret in 1991 and 1992, and released publicly after her death. From the Citylin tapes, recorded by her voice coach in 1992 and 1993 and broadcast in America in 2004 and in Britain in 2017. From Diana's own words in the Panorama interview, watched by 23 million people in November 1995. From the biographers who had access to her circle, Tina Brown, Sally Bedell Smith, Andrew Morton himself. Nothing here is guesswork, and nothing here is easy. Before we go further, if this channel has ever given you a version of Diana that felt true, take 1 second and subscribe. This is the version she recorded herself. The story the institution told about the marriage began with the engagement announcement on February 24, 1981. Smiling couple on the steps of Buckingham Palace, sapphire ring. The most watched engagement in the world. What the institution did not tell you was what happened the moment the interviewer asked the obvious question. Are you in love? Diana said yes, immediately, of course. With everything she felt. Charles's reply, on camera, heard by the world, was this: whatever love means. Diana described her reaction to that sentence on the Citylin tapes years later. She said, that threw me completely, I thought. What a strange question and answer. God, absolutely traumatized me. Whatever love means, said by a man who had just agreed to marry her, said on camera. Said at the moment that was supposed to be the beginning of everything. Royal biographer Sally Bedell Smith later told People magazine what Charles had said privately around that time. He said Diana was someone he could learn to love, not someone he loved. Someone he could, in time, learn to. He was 32 years old. She was 19. He had been in love with someone else for most of his adult life. He had commissioned a bracelet for that someone, engraved with their shared pet names, and sent it to her weeks before the wedding. Not quietly. Personally. Face to face, Diana had found out about the bracelet. She had gone to her sisters. Her sisters had told her the tea towels were already printed and it was too late to change anything. The engagement period, Diana described on the Morton tapes, was a disaster. She pined after Charles during a 3-week trip to Australia to organize the wedding proceedings. He never called. There was, she said, never anything tactile about him. No warmth. No reaching across the distance. Just the machinery of the wedding rolling forward and a man who was about to marry her behaving, in every private interaction, like someone who had other things on his mind. She described the wedding morning itself in terms that, once you hear them, you cannot unhear. I was very, very deathly calm. Deathly,
deathly calm. I felt I was a lamb to the slaughter and I knew it. But I couldn't do anything about it. A lamb to the slaughter. In an ivory silk dress with a 25-foot train, in front of 750 million people, she kept her face composed for every second of it. The cameras read it as radiance. She was 20 years old, and she was performing the most public act of her life in a state she described as deathly calm, which is the calm of someone who has processed the worst of it, and is now simply enduring the formal duration of the thing. Walking down the aisle, she found Camilla in the pews, pale grey pillbox hat. She described looking for her. She described finding her. She kept walking. She hoped, she said, that it was all over now, that the wedding would close something, that the hope she still had, still, through everything, would be met by something on the other side of the ceremony. It was slashed by day 2, the royal yacht, Britannia, Mediterranean sun, 2 weeks at sea that the world imagined as the beginning of a love story. I remember crying my heart out. I was so tired, for all the wrong reasons. Charles brought 7 novels by his favourite author, Lawrence van der Post. He read them all. He and Diana analysed them over lunch every day. Every day. The woman he had just married, who had described there being never anything tactile about him, who had been told by the man himself on their engagement day that love was a concept whose meaning he reserved the right to define, sat across a table on a yacht in the Mediterranean analysing the philosophy of a South African novelist. She cried in the evenings. Not performing, actually crying, for all the wrong reasons. The bulimia, she said on the Morton tapes, came into full force on the honeymoon. She had been making herself sick since the week after the engagement, since the moment Charles put his hand on her waist and said, "A bit chubby here, aren't we?" The first time she made herself sick, she said she was thrilled, because it felt like release, the release of tension, the only valve available in a situation where every other valve had been closed. By the time of the wedding, she had gone from 29 inches at the waist to 23.5. She had shrunk to nothing, she said. From February to July, shrunk to nothing. On the honeymoon, as she was getting thinner and thinner and sicker, Charles said nothing about it. She said everybody saw it. Charles saw it. Nobody helped. She also found the photographs in his diary of Camilla. On the 2nd or 3rd day of the honeymoon, and then at a state dinner aboard the Britannia for Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, she noticed Charles's cufflinks, gold, 2 C's entwined, Camilla's gift, worn on their honeymoon, at a state dinner, in front of his new wife. She confronted him. It was smoothed over, the way things were always smoothed over. I just had tremendous hope in me, which was slashed by day 2. They came back to England, Diana said on the tapes. The first week back after the honeymoon I learned to be a royal in 1 week. I was thrown into the deep end. Nobody ever helped me at all. Nobody. That word, not nobody helpful, nobody. At all. No, no. There were protocol advisors who told her how to walk into rooms and which fork to use, and how to manage the schedule. There was not one person who sat across from her and said, "Here is what this will feel like, and here is what to do when it does." She described panicking at Balmoral in the early months. The rain, the silence, the castle and its rhythms, and the particular coldness of a place that had not been designed for comfort. She got terribly, terribly thin. People started commenting. "Your bones are showing." By October of that first year, she was in a very bad way. Depressed, trying to cut her wrists with razor blades, she said on the tape. In the rain, in Balmoral. Just weeks into her marriage, she sought help. She was told in the various ways the institution communicated these things that there was no help available within the structure she was now part of. The structure managed. The structure did not heal. William was born on June 21, 1982. Diana was pregnant before the first year of the marriage was out. She described it on the tapes as a godsend. The pregnancy occupied her mind from the depression. It gave her something to hold on to. But the pregnancy did not soften Charles. Diana described a moment, 4 months pregnant with William, when she told Charles she felt desperate. She was crying. She needed him to listen. His response as she recorded it on the Morton tapes, "I'm not going to listen. You're always doing this to me. I'm going riding now." He went riding, and Diana, 4 months pregnant, threw herself down the stairs. She said it herself, into the recorder, years later. With the specific directness of someone who has said the sentence enough times in their own head that the words come out cleanly, I threw myself down the stairs, bearing in mind I was carrying a child. The Queen came out. Diana described Elizabeth as absolutely horrified, shaking. She was so frightened. Diana herself said she knew she wasn't going to lose the baby. She said she wanted to injure herself. She wanted Charles to see what she was telling him was real. He came back from riding. He sat with her, briefly, and then the institution absorbed it. No doctor was called to address the cause. No conversation happened that produced any change. It was managed, the way everything was managed. Later, during the same period, she was being sick with her bulimia. She had morning sickness on top of it. She couldn't sleep, she said, didn't eat. The whole world was collapsing around her. She described the pregnancy as very, very difficult indeed. And still, the public tours continued. Still the schedule. Still the appearance of a radiant young princess who was navigating royal life with grace. Harry was born on September 15, 1984. Diana had assumed Charles wanted a girl. The tapes describe what he said when Harry arrived. "Oh God, it's a boy, and he even has red hair." His first words about his second son, his younger son. The boy who would grow up to write a book about his family, and describe the grief of losing his mother and never fully recovering from it. "Oh God, it's a boy, and he even has red hair." Diana said on the tapes, "Something inside me closed off." The mid-1980s, the marriage was 5 years old. 5 years of the managed version running alongside the private version. 5 years of two people in a relationship where one of them had never fully arrived. By 1986, Charles had returned fully to Camilla. He admitted this himself on national television. In 1994, "The marriage had irretrievably broken down," was his phrase before he returned to her. His biographer Jonathan Dimbleby put the date at 1986. Diana knew before the biographers confirmed it. She described it on the Satellan tapes. She described him as hot and cold, hot and cold. You never knew what mood it was going to be, up and down, up and down. She had been told she was the sacrificial lamb. She used the word herself. He had found the virgin, she said on the tape, and he was obsessed with her in the way that he was obsessed, but it was always hot and cold. Always. She overheard the phone call, Charles in the bath at Highgrove, his voice carrying, "Whatever happens, I will always love you." She knew who was on the other end. She described confronting him. The row that followed was filthy, her word, his defense delivered without apparent shame. He refused to be the only Prince of Wales who never had a mistress. Diana went to Philip. She went to the Queen. From Philip she received, according to her own account, news of a timeline, 5 years, after which Charles could return. From the Queen, she received 2 sentences. "I don't know what you should do. Charles is hopeless." And then silence. Everyone in the family knew about the bulimia, she said on the Satellan tapes, and everyone blamed the bulimia for the failure of the marriage. Not the arrangement that had produced the bulimia, not the 5-year rule, not the bracelet before the wedding, or the cufflinks on the honeymoon, or the whatever love means on the steps of Buckingham Palace. The bulimia. The symptom, not the cause. She described fainting during a tour of Canada in 1986. The public were told fatigue. In private, she described Charles's reaction. He told her off. He said she could have passed out quietly somewhere else, behind a door. It was all very embarrassing. Embarrassing, not. "Are you all right?" Not. "What can I do?" Embarrassing. "Inside me," she said, "I knew there was something wrong with me, but I was too immature to voice it." She was 25 years old. She was not too immature to voice it. She was inside an institution that had no mechanism for receiving what she was voicing. There is a difference. She understood it later. It took her years. The Waleses performed their marriage throughout the 1980s with considerable professional competence. They attended events. They smiled. They did the things the schedule required. Australia, New Zealand, America. The tours were mobbed. In Australia, crowds gathered for Diana that dwarfed anything the royal family had seen in decades. Charles stood to the side. He had expected something different, and what he had found was his wife. Diana described the tour in terms that sit differently once you know what was happening behind the schedule. She was performing constantly. Not just performing for the cameras, performing for the marriage. Performing the normalcy that allowed the arrangement to continue. being present in rooms where she was technically present, but where nothing of what she was feeling had any outlet. She described feeling like a fairy princess to the public. They wanted a fairy princess to come, touch them, and everything would turn into gold, and all their worries would be forgotten. Little did they realize that the individual was crucifying herself inside, because she didn't think she was good enough. She was not crucifying herself because she wasn't good enough. She was crucifying herself because she was in a marriage where the person who was supposed to love her had decided, before the wedding and consistently afterward, that love was a concept whose meaning he reserved the right to define. And the institution that surrounded her had assessed the situation and found that management served everyone's interests better than change. She went to the Royal Opera House in the early days of the marriage and broke down in front of Princess Grace of Monaco in the women's bathroom. She poured her heart out. Princess Grace put her hand on her arm and said, "Don't worry, it will only get worse." That's not comfort. That's testimony from a woman who knew the territory. Princess Grace had walked into something similar from a different direction. She knew what it looked like from the inside. And what she told Diana in a bathroom at the Royal Opera House was the honest version of what nobody else would say. It will only get worse. She was right. By the late 1980s, the management had taken on a specific shape that Diana described across multiple accounts with increasing precision. She was not included. That was the architecture of it. Not obviously excluded, the institution wasn't clumsy enough to make the exclusion visible, just not included. Not called, not consulted, not brought in on the decisions about her own schedule, her own charity work, her own image and the way it was being used. She said nobody ever helped her. She said every time she tried to come up for air, he pushed her back down again. The palace had a word for her that circulated in the briefings to journalists. Difficult, unstable, emotional. The neurotic word that royal biographer Penny Junor would use. The damaged word that Sally Bedell Smith would reach for years later. These words did specific work. They reframed the situation. If Diana was difficult, then the difficulty was hers. If she was unstable, then her account of the marriage was suspect. If she was emotional, then her feelings about the arrangement were the problem rather than the arrangement itself. The words turned the patient into the disease. Diana understood what the words were doing. She said it on the Satellan tapes in the specific, precise way she said everything. She described a basic conspiracy inside the royal family among friends, courtiers, bodyguards, valets, to deceive her about the presence of Camilla in her life. Andrew Morton later confirmed that characterization. She felt it as a conspiracy because it functioned as one, not maliciously perhaps, but consistently, systematically, in the way that institutions protect their own arrangements. "My husband made me feel so inadequate in every possible way," she said on the Morton tapes. "Every time I tried to come up for air, he pushed me back down again. Not once. Every time." By 1991, Diana had built a life inside the palace that the palace didn't fully know about. She had a charity work program that was operating outside the official schedule. She had a circle of friends, older women, not palace-connected women, who gave her what the institution couldn't. She was in therapy. She was thinking clearly, in ways that frightened the people around Charles who had a stake in her not thinking clearly. And she was talking to a recorder. Dr. James Colthurst came to Kensington Palace with questions from Andrew Morton in a briefcase in a bicycle basket. Diana snatched the questions away from him, clipped the microphone to herself, and talked. She sometimes laughed. She said what she knew. She said it into a machine that she trusted would outlast the management. The whole thing was ridiculous, she said on the tapes. Here was Diana, a kindergarten teacher, and she had been expected to become a royal in a week. The whole thing was ridiculous. She said it with a wry clarity that tells you she had gained, through years of being told she was too immature and too unstable and too difficult, something the institution had not anticipated. Perspective, the perspective of someone who had been inside the machine and had mapped it, and now understood exactly how it worked and whose interests it served. She recorded 7 hours. She recorded the bracelet and the cufflinks and the whatever love means and the whatever happens. I'll always love you and the going riding now, and the you could have passed out quietly somewhere else. She recorded the rain at Balmoral and the razor blades and the throwing herself down the stairs and the 5-year rule and the 2 sentences from the Queen. She recorded it all, not so she could read it back to herself, so that after she was gone, or after the managed version had had enough time to settle into history as truth, someone would be able to press play and hear the actual account. She was right to do it, because the managed version ran for years. And the managed version said, difficult, unstable, emotional, neurotic. The kind of woman whose account of her own life shouldn't be taken entirely at face value. Press play. Take it at face value. She was a kindergarten teacher who was thrown into the deep end of the most watched marriage in the world, and nobody helped her at all. That is the sentence the institution never wanted on the record. It's on the record. November 20th, 1995. Diana sat across from Martin Bashir in the drawing room at Kensington Palace. The palace found out 15 minutes before air. Charles found out about the same time. The institution that had managed her image for 14 years had no prepared response because there was no prepared response available for this. She had been working toward this moment since the Morton recordings, not in a straight line. Through setbacks and recoveries and the years of finding her voice that the Satellan sessions had been about, she had been a kindergarten teacher. She had been told she was the thick one by her own family. She had been told she was too immature to voice things. She had been managed and briefed against and described as neurotic. She sat across from a camera, and she was none of those things. She was composed. She was precise. She chose her sentences with the care of someone who had thought about them for a long time and knew exactly what weight each word carried. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. She admitted the affair with Hewitt. Not because she was reckless, because she had decided that the admission, the willingness to say yes, I made mistakes too, I was not perfect inside this marriage, gave her the credibility to say everything else. She was not performing victimhood. She was refusing to perform innocence. She said she wanted to be a queen of people's hearts. She said she didn't think she'd be the next Queen of England. She said she thought that Charles might find the top job, the kingship, more suffocating than he realized. She said every word with the precision of someone who had been recording herself for 4 years in preparation. She said it to 23 million people who watched in silence and understood, without having to be told, that they were watching the managed version collapse in real time. The palace was terrified. The Queen wrote to Charles and Diana afterward and told them to divorce, not asked. Told, the word that was always the word when Elizabeth had made up her mind. Diana had won nothing the institution could formally acknowledge, but she had done the thing the institution had spent 14 years preventing. She had put her account on the record, in front of 23 million witnesses, in her own voice, with her own face. Irreversibly. Here is the sentence this script has been building toward. The marriage was not a fairy tale that went wrong. The managed version says that. The managed version says, it started well, then it struggled, then the difficulties became too great. The managed version says, 2 people who tried. Diana's version says something different. It says the marriage was compromised before it began. By a bracelet. By a phone call she wasn't supposed to overhear. By a response to a journalist's question on the day of the engagement announcement. By the whatever love means that threw her completely and traumatized her, and which she described in those exact words to her voice coach years later because it never stopped being the sentence that told the truth about the whole thing. She had been found, she said on the tape. He had found the virgin, the sacrificial lamb. He was obsessed with her, but it was hot and cold, hot and cold. There was never anything tactile. He never called during the Australia trip. Nobody helped at all. She had tremendous hope in her. It was slashed by day 2. That's not a fairy tale that struggled. That's a woman who brought hope to something that had decided, before she arrived, that her hope was a secondary consideration. The marriage was harsh in ways the institution worked very hard to make invisible. Not just harsh in the obvious documented ways, the Camilla of it, the bracelet, the cufflinks, the 30 years of a relationship that never really ended. Harsh in the daily, accumulated, grinding ways that don't make headlines. The whatever love means. The going riding now. The you could have passed out quietly somewhere else. The hot and cold, the throwing herself down the stairs and the Queen coming out horrified and shaking and Charles going riding. Those are the details that don't make it into the fairy tale version. Not because they aren't documented, they are documented, in Diana's own voice on tapes that have been broadcast to millions of people, but because the fairy tale version requires a clean narrative, and the clean narrative requires that the difficulty be abstract. A marriage that struggled, people who tried. The complexity of public life. Irreconcilable differences. Diana's version is not abstract, it is specific. Has dates and has names and nates and out of the understanding that the private record was the true record, and the true record was the thing worth protecting. The world got the fairy tale. The world got the dress and the train and the balcony and the wave, and the 23 million people watching the Panorama interview and the flowers outside the gates in September 1997. Diana made sure the world also got the other version. The tapes, the recordings, the voice that said, "Tremendous hope, slashed by day 2. The voice that said, "He pushed me back down again." The voice that said, "I was crucifying myself inside because I didn't think I was good enough." She was good enough. She was more than good enough. She was the most perceptive person in that marriage, in that institution, in that whole managed arrangement, and the perceptiveness was the thing they couldn't absorb, because a woman who sees clearly and says what she sees is not something the institution has a protocol for. They tried to call her difficult. She was precise. They tried to call her unstable. She was recording everything. They tried to call her emotional. She was keeping the record. Press play. She was right about all of it. Leave her in the apartment at Kensington Palace. Not on the day the tapes were recorded. Earlier, the week after the engagement was announced. February 1981. She is 19 years old. She has just said yes on the steps of Buckingham Palace with the sapphire ring on her finger. The world has seen it. The photographers got the shot. Now she is back in the apartment. Or in the room she had then, before the apartment, before the palace absorbed her entirely. And she is thinking about the sentence he said, the thing the journalist asked, and the thing he answered. Whatever love means, she said it traumatized her. She said it threw her completely. She said it as a woman in her 30s, with everything that had happened between the engagement and the recording, and the memory of that sentence was still sharp enough to produce those words. Traumatized. Completely. She was 19 years old, and the man she was about to marry had told the world that love was a concept whose meaning he was not prepared to confirm. And she had stood there with the ring on her finger, and the photographers still adjusting their lenses, and she had held her face composed for every second of it. She had tremendous hope in her. She brought all of it to the marriage. She brought hope and love, and the willingness to change everything and go anywhere and try anything. She brought the frog she made as a child, and the letters she wrote by hand, and the wig she wore in Chelsea, and the ironing board in a flat she could have bought the building of. She brought the 4 words in the basement, and the composure in front of 23 million people, and the 7 hours of recordings she made so the truth would outlast the management. She brought all of it. And the thing she had brought it to had decided, before she arrived, that the arrangement already existed, and she was being accommodated into it, and the hope she had was secondary to the continuity of the institution, and the preservation of the arrangement that the institution had decided, in advance, was how things would be. She stood on those steps and said yes, and smiled for the cameras. Behind her, the tea towels were already printed. She knew. She went in anyway, with everything she had. That is not a tragedy. That is not a fairy tale. That is a woman who showed up completely for something that showed up for her partially, inconsistently, and, in the end, not enough. She showed up anyway. Every time. Until the day she decided to stop showing up for the managed version and show up instead for the true one, which is the version you've been listening to all along. Thank you for staying with me through this one. Of all the scripts this channel has produced, this is the one that asks the most of you, because it asks you to hold the full picture at once. The fairy tale and the tapes simultaneously. The radiant woman and the one who said tremendous hope slashed by day 2 in the same voice, about the same marriage, in the same life. They are not contradictions, they are the same woman. The one who showed up completely and was held at a distance. The one who performed the fairy tale and recorded the private version so the private version would survive. Both of those things are true. Both of those things are Diana. And the reason the marriage was harsher than you thought is not because it was hidden from you. It's because the fairy tale version was louder. Diana made sure, eventually, that the other version was loud enough to be heard alongside it. She did. Press play. She was telling the truth from the beginning.